Welcome back again, folks, to another episode of the Ram Quip podcast, where we talk about sheep and goat production. Matt and I are here today again, and today we have a special guest on that I'm excited to visit with. His name's Victor Wolf from Costa Rica. I met him this past summer at the Katahdin Expo. Victor was up to take in that event, and we got to chat some, and we decided we'd like to get Victor on and hear a little bit about how he runs his sheep operation in Costa Rica. So before we dig into that, today is Thursday, April 9, 2026. For those of you who always like a point of reference as to what part of the season we are in when we do an interview. So glad to have you on today, Victor.
Well, thank you, Leon, and thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to join you and be part of the program.
Yes. So Victor, to get started, can you tell us a little bit of the background of how you got started in sheep, and maybe how you landed on the Katahdin breed?
Of course. It's a funny story because, well, I grew up on a ranch and we basically had cattle and horses, and we still do. Somewhat of a lot of farming also. We do rice, sugarcane. We have what do you call it? Palm oil and some teak, all at the same place. And my son is back then, I guess he was like 35, and he started the sheep project. But then he met this lady from Honduras and married and left. So it's funny. I inherited the sheep from my son. Usually it's the other way around, right?
Yeah.
And so when he left to Honduras to live, and he's got a great family, and he still comes and enjoys. Like, he was actually last week over here because of Easter, and he's really a great fan of sheep. So he had started it with some friends, and he brought in, I believe it was like 15 ewes back then. And so when he left, he had about 100, and I said, well, I either get this up or I get it out. And I started investigating, and I started liking it, and they were just running around everywhere. And of course, if you were going to get a little bigger, that was not the option. So I started looking around, and this was about 8 years ago. And a friend told me there's a person down in South Costa Rica that was selling another 200. So we did go over there and got him, and that's how I got involved with sheep, and that's how we started more rotational grazing and a more formal business. I now have about 300 ewes.
Okay. Interesting.
What breed were those sheep?
Okay, so that the original sheep were Katahdin. He loved Katahdin. I love Katahdin. Katahdin to us is we're in the tropics, and it's so similar to in the cattle when you look at the normal, Angus, Brangus, or Simmental cows compared to the Zebu or the Brahmans.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like the Brahman of the sheep, and there's so much more resistant to the heat and to the weather and to the water. We're in the tropics. So Costa Rica, for those of you who don't know, we're in Central America, and we're right in the tropics. So the weather is very nice, but at times it could be a little hot, not terribly hot, but very humid. And then at times it could be very rainy. We're in the rainforest. So there's 6 months out of the year that we have rain every day, 1 or 2 inches of rain every day. So imagine how much moist that is. And then there's 6 months out of the year we get no rain at all. So it gets a little hot and windy, and we, nothing harsh like the weather you guys have. So our sheep are out there basically we just checked this morning when we started, and we're 73 degrees out here. And that's probably the weather we have 365 days a year. The temperature doesn't change. The only thing that changes is whether it rains or it doesn't rain. So it will get hot. It'll be probably hot, never over 100, but it'll get hot in the 90s by noon. And then 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll drop down again. So it's really, really nice weather.
Yeah.
And the first 15 were Katahdin. But when we went out and bought that group of 200, the guy we bought it from had everything. I mean, everything under the sky. Hampshire, Charolais, Dorper, White Dorper, Black Belly. There's a breed called Santa Ynez. Santa Ynez comes from Brazil. Very similar to Katahdin, but they're black and they have long ears.
Okay.
And
How do you spell that breed?
Santa would be like saint, and Ines would be Ines, Ines, Santa Ines. Beautiful breed, very nice. As a matter of fact, those are the two I use now. I use Katahdin probably 80%, and I use Santa Ines 20%. On I have some herds that are single stud or single ram, so I could keep more of the genetics on them. And then I have the large herd that goes out with 8, 10 rams, and there's usually 5 or 6 Katahdins and 1 or 2 Santa Ynez rams out there. So it's very, very slick hair and very muscled, and it's similar in body, I say, but it's way, way, way for tropicals, and you can look at it. You can look at it. Anybody interested can look at
I looked
Santa
it up
Ynez
right now.
Yeah, I think Katahdin is still the best, but the second one for me is not the Dorpers. It's the Santa Ynez. Of course, I'm in a different situation than a lot of people because of my tropical weather here. But that's basically why we picked Katahdin. And then over the years, we've just used Katahdin and Santa Ynez rams. And this is 8 years. So basically, there's still some black ones out there. There's still some black bellies, and I don't call the herd based on the breed. I call them based on their performance.
Yeah.
So more and more, it's Katahdin out there.
That's interesting.
So, with that type of a climate, kind of gives me a couple questions. So, one, that's some prime parasite weather, or maybe you don't have them down there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
When I first got those 200, and I think that story is very, very cruel, but very nice and very actual, is that I had that herd that my son had running around everywhere. It was just out there because we had fences for cattle, so sheep just went right through underneath, and they were just running around the whole farm, the whole ranch part, the whole where the animals are, because then the agriculture is far away. But it's probably about 100 acres, and they were just running around everywhere. And then, some would die, some didn't die. He never had tags or numbers. It was just out there. And when I brought in the group, I identified each one. I started, having records, weights, weaning. I started breeding seasons, and I probably had 100 deaths. At least a third of my herd died from parasites. The mungos, something like that it's called.
Yep.
That one is just terrible here because of the weather and because of everything. So I started reading and about deworming or actual management. And what worked best for me was management. I don't deworm, not anymore. And it didn't work back then. It really was so bad that deworming is not the solution to control the parasite. So what I understood and what I read is the parasite has a cycle that when the sheep does the excrement, it goes into the pasture. And I'm pasture, by the way. A lot of the Katahdins, at least in Mexico that I've been to, they're all in feedlots. They're all in confined. Right. And there you don't have parasite problem. But my sheep are out in the pasture every day. So the parasite, when the sheep does the excrement, it's got millions of eggs per little ball. And then in 7 days, those eggs become the larva. And the larva climbs up the grass and stays at the top. And when the sheep comes in and eats it, that's when it closes the cycle and comes back in. So the period between the sheep doing the excrement in the pasture and that larva being out of the egg and into the top of the grass is about 7 days, 7 to 10 days. And it will stay alive for about 2 weeks. So what I did, I got together with an ag guy, and we figured that we could pasture the sheep in the same place for 3 days. And we should rotate, or those sheep should come back to that same pasture no sooner than 30 days. Yeah. So we took the area we wanted and we divided into 11 pastures, 11 sections. So we put the sheep fence and we rotated. Some are in pie, some have an alley on the way and just gates and water. And we made them equally sized, 11 per section, per piece. So like, if I have the young ewes that don't go out with the rams, those will have 11 pastures. The older ewes that have rams, those have 11 pastures. The male that I'm, they're going out for market, because I keep them here until they go to market. I don't send them to any finishing guy. So I have 3 different rotations, 33 different pastures. They're little, but that was amazing, and that was the fix. Mm-hmm. So since then, every now and then you have one, they break the fence, or they go underneath, or they do something, and then you get 2 or 3 out of the 600 or 700 that are out there that get parasites, and you deworm those. We do look for famacha. I guess you guys call it the same, right? Yep. So we do look for famacha once a month. Some of the groups that are in better shape, we only do it once every 3 months. And like yesterday, I probably ran about 300 ewes through the corrals yesterday, and there was not one with a Famacha 3 that I had to deworm.
Yeah,
good.
As I'm thinking about your system there, here in the U.S., we do a similar type of rotation to avoid parasites. But as I'm thinking about your climate, the life cycle on those parasites is very consistent in how long it's going to take them to hatch and be viable and then die out again. Here, because of it, like when we get into colder weather, our cycle slows down. So now, even if you're coming back 30 days later, there's probably some that are hatching. Not many, so it's not a big issue, where once we get into the warmer summer month, that cycle really speeds up, where they're hatching and viable pretty quickly, and then they die out again. I just had to think about that. I think in your system, it's probably a very consistent life cycle on those parasites in your climate.
At least that's what I found out. All I read, I never heard of that, but it makes sense. I'm sure, when it's very cold, it gets to somewhat of a hibernation or something, or it slows down. But no, here, like I said before, our temperature is always the same. What varies is how much rain we get. And we only have 2 seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. Yep. So it is pretty consistent. I guess if you have that, you have to have more pastures, probably would be the option, and go out, not to 30 days, but 45 days, or extend the rotation to 4 days instead of 3 days. And that will give you 45 days before you come back to the same pasture, because you're safe for 7 days. You're safe in the same pasture for 7 days.
Yeah.
The reason I did 3 was not for parasites, which is also a very interesting thing. The reason I did 3 is because the ag guy told me that, sheep or cattle or horse, and I do, by the way, my sheep are together with horses and cattle in the same pastures. So the sheep or the cow or the horse will come in and they will eat the grass. They will probably look for the most tender and because I don't have monotone grass, I have the regeneration system, and there's all kinds of grasses out there. So they'll come in and eat the best one. That's what they'll do the first day. And then if there's nothing left of that, they'll go to the second and the third. And, I grew up in traditional farming, which you only had one type of grass and you did herbicide for everything. And I don't do that anymore. When I was a kid, there was grass and everything else was weed. Today, we have grass, we have good weed and bad weed. So there's 3 types. And we don't use any of the chemicals because it also kills the good weed, which has high protein and good nutrients for the ground. So we do very little manual work after the sheep are gone. But the interesting part is what was I going? I lost the track, but talking about the herbicide.
So you were talking about your rotation and how speeding up or not.
Okay. The reason I'm doing 3 days. Yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Thank you. So it happens that they'll eat, and they'll eat the second day, and they'll eat the third day. On day 4, most grasses will start growing again. Right. So if you keep them there more than 3 days, day 4, the cattle, the sheep will not go out and eat the rest.
Mm-hmm.
They will go back and eat the regrow.
Yep.
And they really kill the best pasture, because when they'll eat the regrow, which starts in day 4, what was eaten the first day, then they'll come in and eat the regrow. So I don't know, again, in your area with the winter, how that works, because I know some of your pastures are different and they're seasonal, but here they're not. They're constant pastures, and most of them have their roots on the outside, and that's the reason I change them every 3 days, is to avoid the grass losing. And it is amazing. There's always I guess people think and say every time I tell them I have sheep, is well, don't they ruin your pastures? And my pastures look beautiful. They're fertilizing them. I take them out at 3 days, and when they come back, they're lush and big, and so that really helps. That was the reason for the 3 days. So the parasites was the changing,
Yeah.
but the 3 days regrow was the reason I selected the 11 pastures and coming back at 35 days. I was in Paraguay a few years ago, and they have 60 pastures before they get their cattle or their sheep back in. And they're very harsh weather there. They don't get any water. It could be 3 or 4 years without rain. And the only water they get is from the meltdown of the mountains when it snows.
Are they only grazing once a year then on some of those pastures, or
Grazing all year round.
all year round?
Yeah. It's looks like hay, but they're grazing.
Wow.
That's cool.
Interesting.
What happens in your system when you get into the dry weather? You just continue the rotation through? Is there ever,
I do, and it gets bad. And I'm telling you, we are right now at the end of the your spring is when we start getting rain. So we have maybe gotten a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, and we're still going to have one more month of drought before it starts raining again. So they do start coming down. The growth is slower, and suffer a little bit. But that I guess that's what farming and
Yeah.
and being in agriculture is about, right?
Do you ever get a season where it's bad enough that you have to feed some hay or supplement them somewhere, or you're usually just able to?
No. Now they do get hay in the pens at night.
Okay.
Yes.
So you bring them in every night.
Every night. Every sheep sleeps inside.
Why is that?
Predators.
And what's your biggest concern there? What predator?
2-legged.
I was just gonna ask.
Wow.
I knew that's a problem in some places. I was gonna ask you if it's 2-legged or 4-legged.
Yes, no, it's 2-legged. I had problem with the 4-legged, and I'm new at this. I've been for 8 years, and it's a funny story also. and at least an experience that I have, different subject, but in one of the farms or one of the pastures is way out there, and I had coyote and I had what do you call it? Well, even dogs, and so they told me buy dogs, use the Kango dog, and there's very little sheep in Costa Rica. There's very little dogs, but there's this guy that had Kango dogs, so I went out and bought a pair of Kango dogs, a female and a male, and I brought him in to try to get him, and it was just so hard. I have no experience. The dogs had no experience. They'd never seen sheep, and probably their parents never seen sheep, and they ended up eating the sheep, and I had a system where the ewes are out in the pasture with the rams, whether they're pregnant or not, and when they lamb, I move them to another one. So the dog thought that was intruder, and they would eat the new lamb or the little. So it was very difficult. I ended up tying the dog so that the sheep could escape from the dog, and then I heard through just there that if you use turpentine and if you spray turpentine on top of the sheep, the cats, or the wolves or the tigers or whatever predator is coming will not come close to it. So I said, there's no harm in trying. So on a sprayer, just a back sprayer that's 16 liters, 4 gallons. You put 8 ounces of turpentine that you buy out in the store, and you mix it together. And every 3 days, when I do the rotation only, and they go out that morning, I spray them lightly with the water and turpentine, and that ended absolutely every problem. With normal dogs that, I'm in a rural area, but there's dogs that run around loose.
Yeah.
And then I also at night had the problem with, with either cats or coyotes.
Interesting.
That's interesting. So you don't use guard dogs at all anymore. You
Nope.
just do that turpentine. How often do you have to put that on?
Every 3 days.
Every 3 days.
Every 3 days, just spray them lightly. With the gate coming out, I just make it a little smaller. And the guy has the pump in there, and as they go out, you just spray them lightly over the top, and that's enough smell to keep the predators away. So that was a really, really nice quick fix, and it's something that when I get asked, I like to tell it because it really works for me.
Probably keeps some of the bugs away too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, we have ticks, but it's funny how Katahdin doesn't pick up any ticks. I'll have the cattle full of ticks and the horses full of ticks in the same pasture, and the sheep will never pick up the ticks.
Why is that?
I have no idea.
Is there other
Good question. Maybe something to look about.
is there other, as we're thinking about that, is there other insects and bugs maybe that you deal with that we don't? I mean, we talked about parasites, you mentioned ticks. Is there some other things?
Yes. Well, for years we had screwworm eliminated. I don't know if you've heard the news, but part of the reason that cattle is not coming in from Mexico or anything for that matter, horses and everything were banned, has been banned for almost a year, is because screwworm came back to Central America. There was a project back in the 80s and 90s where the U.S. AID program eliminated the screwworm all the way from Mexico to coming all the countries down Costa Rica and to Panama. And there's a barrier in Panama called the Darien, which is about 150 miles with no road, no anything. And so they did that by sterilizing males and putting them out on airplanes. And this is a fly. It's called a screwworm, but it's a very colorful green fly. Very big. A normal fly looks aesthetically it's the same, but it's a little bigger and shinier and green. And they had eliminated. When I was a kid, I remember we had to go out and rope cows and stuff, and the screwworm gets into any wound or any scratch, and they can multiply in the hundreds in days. If you leave out there 2 or 3 days, when you come, it's a big thing with just worms in there and a lot of blood. So that with the Venezuelan invasion into the U.S. back a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, that we had 3 or 4,000 people coming a day. I guess they came with dogs or even themselves brought the screwworm back to Panama. It went back to Costa Rica. It's all the way up to Mexico now, and they say there's even some cases in Texas.
They're in,
Yeah.
yeah, they're in the States.
I'm sure.
And I don't know how far north they've come. A ways, I think. I'm not that familiar with it. Do you
I
know?
think it's only Texas at this point,
Okay.
and probably through the winter it was very controlled because that specific insect will not go through the winter.
We
But,
had a good hard winter here on the East Coast, so I think we
Yeah.
probably pushed them back a bit if they were
Yeah,
trying to.
I don't think they're way up there, but I'm sure the authorities are working on that.
Yeah.
That's a
For
very
us-
interesting subject in itself, right there. How they have controlled that for how many years?
Oof,
by-
at least
by-
20,
Yeah.
20 years, Leon. It was amazing. I mean, it was something that we didn't even think was possible. We grew up curing screwworm problems, and then all of a sudden you had these planes, and they gave you these little jars. Every time you found one, you put them in the jar alive before you cure them, and you call in an 800 number, and the USID person, or well, obviously the local person here with those funds, would come in, and with those little worms, they would reproduce them. And then I think, from what I've heard, it's a laser that they put through. They sort the males for the females. They only mate once, and their plane goes out with literally thousands of flies in areas where they have cases, and those males will mate the female, and because they're sterile, then there's no offspring, and that's how they bring the population down. Remember, flies live only for 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
So if you could control their mating, or not the mating, because there are mating, you control their fertility, you bring the population down. So
Yeah.
they're still working on it now. They don't have the USID funds. Obviously, US at this point is working only in the US, not out here. But they have the technology. They're using it, and they're putting out planes with stuff, and it's gotten a little better. But I would say the last 2 or 3 years we had to start. And for the younger kids, they never seen anything like that. I'm 60, and I grew up with it, but like I said, for like 20, 25 years, we didn't have any. So that would be another issue we have, is the screwworm. And then obviously, hoof rot, especially in the rainy season when, you get rain every day and every day. And to me, that's where the Dorper didn't work at all. I mean,
Yeah.
they're nice and chubby and stuff, but their hoof is probably, because of the genetics and because of their origin in South Africa, is probably from a much drier area. So that's why I had to shy away from those completely. And the Katahdins are definitely very, very strong and very adaptable to that.
Yeah. Interesting. So can we look a little bit at your production system? So you don't really have, here we have a summer and a winter. A lot of guys lamb in the spring or early winter. What does that look like with your climate and everything? Before we got started here, you mentioned you lamb 3 times a year, or you have 3 lambing seasons maybe. You don't really have seasons quite like we do, but yeah, what does that look like?
Okay, so we don't have season like you do. So originally, rams were out with ewes all year, and it was just management wise and selling wise and weaning wise and everything. It was just terrible, especially when it started getting a little bigger. So I figured, we could get them pregnant and they can lamb anytime, because the weather is not an issue. So there are a couple of months. There's actually 2 months where it really, really rains very hard, and that's September, October. So I said, I want to stop lambing in September, October, because when those little babies come out, it's just very hard for them in the humidity, lack of sun, and lots of water. So I start I went back and took the rams out so they would not lamb September and October. And then I saw that there was so much benefit to having 2 months that I didn't have any lambs. And then later on, it was benefited with the weaning and everything. So I said, well, the cycling season is 21 days. So why don't we do three, three, um, 3 seasons? So I put in the lambs for 63 days, and then I take out the lambs for 60 days, and then I put them back in and put them out. So it's 2 months in, 2 months out, 2 months in, 2 months out. And I made it in such a way that there's no lambing in September, October. And then the rest just had, by going to 2 months on, 2 months off. And it is so simple. It has really changed my life in everything. And I'm now weaning all the lambs that go in that 2 months. I wean them at once. I used to wean every 2 weeks, or then I went, it was just so much more handling. And now it's so easy. So I get basically three generations. And my goal for the good lambs is to have three lambing, 3 productions in 2 years.
Yeah.
So they should be lambing in 8 months. And I have my average for the herd, for the 300 ewes that I have, is about 250 days between
Lambing.
between
Lambing. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Huh.
So 250 days.
That's average.
8
So you're
months, 8
getting-
months and 10 days.
Okay. So you're getting right to that 3 lambings in 2 years.
That is correct. That
Yep.
is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is all on a forage based operation.
Yes.
No
That is
grain
correct.
to your ewes.
A little grain. I complement when they're lamb for milking purposes. I give them a little grain.
And
The
you're
ones
doing
that are out in the pasture with the rams, they don't get any grain. They only get hay at night and minerals.
Okay.
But once they lamb, I take them out of that pasture and put them in another pasture, and they get a little grain. And then I also creep feed all the little ones.
Okay.
And when they're weaned, most males, well, I'll pick 1 or 2 that are, prospect rams, and those will get a lot of grain and a different treatment. And the ewes, I'm usually replacing 20%. So that 20% goes out to the pasture because I want them to become resistant and accustomed to pasture. The rest will go to elevated where we'll start getting them out ready for market.
Yeah.
And what is that on in a dry lot on feed, or is that on pasture with feed? What's that look like?
What goes for what goes to market, it's all in a feedlot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you said elevated, so I'm guessing these are elevated pens with
Yes.
slab.
They're elevated like 3 feet
Yeah.
above the ground.
Yeah. Why do you do that versus to having them on the ground? I've seen those pictures of those types of systems.
Well,
but I'm always intrigued that we don't have more of them here in the U.S.
Elevated has two advantages. One is I have the panels are like the pig panels. I think they're very common in the pig industry. So all their manure and or urine goes through, so you don't have to clean them at all. So you're in a thing, you don't never have to clean them. And what's underneath, it's fertilizer for your pastures.
Yep.
So every 4 or 5 months, we just go in with a tractor and clean it out and put it out in the pasture. But on a daily basis, you don't have to do any cleaning. And then the other thing, there's air flowing underneath, and they're elevated a little bit, so the temperature is way less. And when you are trying to get more pounds per day, temperature is an issue. When the higher the temperature, or I guess the lower could also influence. If they're under stress, it takes them calories to combat the stress. So those are the 2 issues that are beneficial when you do an elevated.
Yep.
How are you getting in underneath that 3 feet high off the ground? How are you getting in there to clean it out?
Ramps. Oh,
In-
I
in-
have to elevate it. Let's say, well, I have it in meters, so it's 6 meters by 6 meters. So that'll be, it's like 20 feet by 20 feet square,
Mhm.
and it has it's on a iron steel plates that they go up, and then you could
Oh.
drive in with the tractor clean, and then you just put them down.
Okay.
You need to send me some pictures of that.
Oh, I sure will. I sure will.
So Matt, he sent me pictures last summer of some of his sheep grazing and stuff, and he has some, it looks like some funny looking grass.
Yeah.
There's some of the pastures at certain times of the year that the pasture's higher than the sheep, and I remember you showing those.
Yeah.
He showed those to you.
That's interesting. Yeah, I like how in your system you're leaving all the ewes together that don't have lambs on them, but then when they lamb, you pull them out and just put them separate. With your program, it just keeps it simple. You keep the rams in there. When they lamb, you just pull the ewes out. It's a neat way to do it. We also try to do 3 lambings a year, but since we do have a
Years.
climate or 3 lambings in 2 years,
Yeah.
our spring breeding, which we're just getting into now, it's hard to get those ewes bred. So, the way we do it is we're using cedars and PG 600 to try and manipulate those ewes to get them to
You
cycle.
got them to cycle. Yeah.
And then we have everything in separate groups. Those ewes will all get ultrasounded, so we know who's going to lamb in the fall. Other times a year, we usually don't bother. They should be bred. They should get bred. But that's a
But-
cool, yeah. I just like that system that you have. I think that's something that could be.
Yeah, well, over the years, like I said, there's not many sheep herds in Costa Rica. There's a lot of little ones. They'll have 20, 30, maybe 50 ewes, but I'm one of the largest, and it's hard to there's no culture. So I've been, trial and error, and doing what works best and what's easiest. And I find that was one of the better ways, just to keep them together.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when they lamb, that's the day we separate them.
Yep. And then you
So
feed those ewes a little extra. You can creep feed the lambs. Yeah.
Right.
so
Right.
one thing that's to your advantage is that you're managing all those ewes the same, whereas we would one of the reasons we manage ours different, Matt, is because we want to change nutrition certain times of the year, but he's on your grass is probably pretty good stuff most of the year.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Mostly, and especially because of the regeneration management and stuff, I can pretty much assume that there's 12 to 14% protein out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I want to go back and just make sure I have this straight. You said you're keeping all those ewes together and you're putting the ram in 2 months, out 2 months. And then you're just pulling whatever lambs. The only time when you pull it is when it lambs. You're not pulling. So that really just keeps it simple.
We could do a similar system here, Leon. We just got a little caught up with, our dry ewes need X, our late bred ewes need this much more.
Some of that's a cost thing, though.
Well, for
Also-
us, we're
Yeah.
very high.
Well, for me too. I mean, the minute I put it out of there and put it in the corral with the lambs, that's a cost for me, because and now I'm feeding her all the nutrients for completely, instead of having them go out and source it in the pasture.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I wait till the last minute. And they're in good shape. They're in good shape, and their udders will come out nice, and birth weights. I'll get 4 kilos, which is eight pounds. And the better ones, and the little ones, when you say that's a little one, not all the ewes are great. It's about 2.5, 3 kilos, which would be 2.5 would be about five pounds.
Yeah, that's small.
Yes, very small. very small.
What? So then on your ewes, you're keeping track though of when they're lambing, so you're able to go in and call those ewes that are not lambing.
That is correct.
What's your criteria on that? Is it
Okay,
you're not
we
hitting
don't
them-
do ultrasounds ever.
Right.
So my criteria for calling on fertilization is when they have when they've missed 2 seasons. In other words, if they lamb now, I'm not going to wean them. When I wean them is the next breeding season.
Yeah.
So they'll go into that breeding season. And then the next calving season or lambing season, they're not supposed to come because they're only 2 months pregnant. But the next one they need to. So if they don't do on that one, I call that the first X.
Yeah.
And then in the second one, I will call them out. And those ewes that I call them atrasadas, they're delayed. They did not come back on the one time they should have. I will take them out of the pasture where the rams are, and I will put those in with the replacement ones.
Mm-hmm.
So they do not go with ram. So if they're pregnant and they lamb the next season, they're staying in the ranch. But if they're not, I already know they're not pregnant, and then they go to market.
Yep. Yep.
And of course, at the beginning, it was a lot. But if you're strict about your calling methods, and that way I don't have to do ultrasounds or bring a vet for that and all that. So I keep it down, and my average, like I said before, on calving interval is just a little bit over 10 months, 8 months and 10 days.
Yeah.
Yep. That's interesting.
So what's your market? Or Matt, did you have a question before we talked about that?
No, that's fine.
So our market is mostly tourism, high-end restaurants. I have a couple of supermarkets that have lamb, and they're good customers of mine. But mostly, Costa Ricans don't eat lamb. It's not customary. It's something new. So we are. I guess it's the old joke about the shoemaker that sent the 2 kids to Africa. Do you know that one?
No.
It's a good one. So
Let's hear
it's
it.
a Spanish guy, and he's got a shoe factory, and he sends his 2 kids to Africa because he wants to open up his market or sell more. And so the kids get back, and then he gets on the phone with one of them and says, "Dad, you lost your money sending us here. The trip was expensive, and nobody uses shoes. Everybody goes barefoot." He says, "Oh, wow. What a shame." Minutes later, he talks to the other son. He says, "Dad, we got the best business we can ever do. We could sell everybody shoes here."
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's
That's
all about perspective.
Exactly. So if you go with the first one, you could say, don't breed sheep and stuff because nobody eats lamb, and they don't. But if you go with the second guy, our potential of growth and our market is growing every day, and there's people starting to like it, and definitely Costa Rica is a tourist place.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of tourism. There's a lot of people we have from Europe and from Israel and from just all over the place. And the better tourist areas, which is one near the volcano, and others near the beach, they are pretty much our market.
Interesting.
Do you see that, like here in the States, a lot of the lamb that gets eaten is by the ethnic groups or the people who come in from other countries.
That would be similar to us.
But we're also seeing the younger generation likes to try out new stuff.
Yes.
And
Yes.
lamb's an easy sell, really. I mean, there's a lot of benefits of eating lamb, both for your health, for the way they're
the
raised.
tenderness and the taste, and we have had no backdraw. It really, every time you go and you do tastings, or I don't do any of that. I try to stay in the farming part at the ranch, but the guys that I sell it to, and they're doing all that stuff, they are getting good reaction.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hmm.
Matt, anything else you would like to tackle yet?
I have a lot.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about with your rainy season, which I guess you addressed that a bit, that you try not to lamb in rainy season. Because I'm assuming rainy season or dry season, your ewes go out to graze regardless. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, they will go out and graze. I try not to lamb in the 2 months that rains the most, which is
Yeah.
pretty much the same. Like in the States, maybe it's going to be cooler January and
Yeah.
February. For us, it's going to be rainier September, October. But they do still go out every day. And there's times where I probably, in parts of my farm, I probably suffer more in the rainy season because the footing, and when they step in, it just gets so muddy and grass doesn't grow correctly than in the dry season.
Yeah.
And that's not the same case for everybody in Costa Rica, but we are at sea level. So our water table is very close, and somehow the grass, even though it doesn't rain, they're able to get some moisture from within the ground, and it will not be totally green like it would normally be on a rainy season, but I still get pasture growth even when it doesn't rain. And then it's dry and they don't hurt in their feet, and it probably has an effect that, less pasture volume has more nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
But in the dry season, oh, the horses, the cows, the sheep look beautiful. They're shiny. They're in great shape. But to your question, when it's raining and muddy, they still have to go out there.
Yep.
Yes.
Still gotta
Including
live for a living.
Yeah.
Exactly. The good ones and the bad ones.
Yeah.
that includes your ewes and lambs, or where do the ewes go once they have lambs on them?
They will go to the stable, pens.
Okay.
They're in pens for the 60 days until I wean.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that.
Which is another, okay, that cool. A few years ago we did a project with cattle about taking the calves away for the morning after they give birth. So we give them like 7 days and they're fine. The first 7 days they're with their mama and everything, and they're twins, they're getting together. But after 7 days, they'll go into the normal pen. In that pen, we take out the little babies. We take out all the lambs at 7 a.m. when we're feeding the first time, and they stay separate from their moms until 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay.
What this does is it gives the ewe time for herself. It gives the ewe psychologically preparing for weaning, and reproductively also getting ready. So back then, in that study that we did here with a bunch of cows, we were able to get the cows pregnant 30 days earlier by doing this, taking the calves out for 4 to 6 hours a day while they're milking, while they're nursing. So I'm doing the same thing with them.
Okay.
So for those 2 months, they're in pens.
Yep.
Not completely roofed, some roof and some area where they go out in the sun, because sun is important for reproduction.
Mhm.
So the troughs and an area for them, if it rains, they could be covered. But then there's also an area that they can go out and see the sun and walk. And every day after the first week until they get weaned, they get the little ones get separated for 6 hours. And that is amazing. Your weaning weights go up, your reproduction recovery on the mother comes in, and you get better less interval between lambing.
That's interesting.
That is really interesting. I have never heard that before.
Yeah.
And your lambs would start on creep feed batter. Probably because those 6 hours that you have them separate, the only thing there for them to eat is creep feed, right?
Yeah, and make sure they have water,
Yeah.
hay, and the creep feed.
Yeah.
So
And then what I do at one is we open up the little doors so they go into their mamas. They're desperate to go into their mamas, but they can still come back out to that area anytime they want because they'll be creep feeding a bale there. So as they get bigger, you see them coming back out in the afternoon or at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're keeping the ewes basically in what we would call a jug, like a small pen.
Yeah, not
They're-
really small.
They're all running together though, right?
Huh?
They're all running together. All the
No,
they're-
no, I
Oh.
have several pens.
Okay.
I had them all running together, and it was difficult for it was some of the little ones were having difficulty finding their mamas and fighting. So I do it by age. Since I have 60 days lambing,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll start filling up the pens. There's like 20 ewes per pen.
Yeah.
And then I fill this one out. I go to the next one, the next, and they're all in a row. So feeding is easy, and separating them is easy.
So you have 20 sheep running together with their lambs in a pen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm getting the
And I will
picture now.
separate if they're singles or twins.
Okay.
There'll be a pen for twins, and those get feed a little more.
Yeah.
The ewes, and if they're singles,
Yeah.
and it's by age. So probably the first 2 weeks of lambing, or sometimes you get 20 in 1 week, or even more. There's weeks when it put the rams in a certain months, depends on on how many it is. You get 80 lambs in 1 week. So I fill up 3 or 4 pens.
Yeah. When you go to separate those lambs out every day, do you have like a chute system you run them through?
Just the gate. All those pens are in a row, and they have an alley.
Okay.
And the gate goes through the alley and closes the alley. So all the guys do, or my help or me, is you take them out of the pen into the alley, and then you just start calling them, and you say, mama, 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 and they'll come back. I mean, it's hard once or twice,
Yeah.
and then they just get the hang of it every day. Amazing.
Yeah. That's pretty neat. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a cool thing. I'm glad you brought up the thing about how I handle because those 2 months they're inside. It costs a little more because I'm feeding them, but they also get that little extra management, and I am a firm believer that helps them. And then they're all cool, neat things that that I do different. The other thing I do when I wean them, is normally I used to wean them, take them out, right? So I used to take the day of weaning, mamas went back to the herd, and the little ones went to the elevated. Well, I would lose 1 or 2 weeks of gaining weight.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody told me, and I used it, and it's working perfect, is the day of weaning, I only take the mamas out, but I leave them there for 2 extra weeks. So they only get one stress, the stress of lack of mama, but not the stress of change of place.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. I mean, little things like that, because
Mhm.
when you have a lamb that's coming and growing and doing his own routine about the creep feed and the going, and and you do all this mix, and then you change them, and then my creep feed is pellet, and the feed that is out in the elevator is powder. So you change them in the environment, you change them in the feed, you change them, take the mama away. It was all the stress. They used to even lose weight or stop gaining weight for 1 or 2 weeks, and then all that you have to recuperate again.
Yeah.
So by doing it this way, we only take the mamas away. We don't move them until they're used to it 2 weeks later.
Yep. So
Interesting.
you said you're feeding a pellet to those lambs, and then a powder on the elevated platforms. I'm just curious because you said there's not a lot of sheep run in Costa Rica. Do you have a good source for that? I guess you guys are also farming some grain, so you might have more options with that, but are you able to source that? I guess is kind of what
I have a guy, which is the same guy that provides my feed for the horses, and with him, we did some formulas that are for, and at the beginning we had like 5 formulas. and you want to do everything so by the book.
Yep. I hear you.
And then you get to the field and it's like crazy, right?
Yep.
Keeping the inventory and doing this and doing that. And so we now have two formulas of feed. I have the creep feed for the little babies. It comes in a little very thin pellet, and it's 18% protein. And then we have the normal feed, which at one time I had one for the milking and one for the what's finishing.
Yep.
But now what I do is I just via amount try to get to the balance of their requirements, and not via a different feed, because then that just means that my supplier needs to bring different quantities and different things. So the other feed is a 12% protein.
Yeah.
And that's the one I use to give to the ewes when they're in production, and that's the one I use for the finishing and the elevated.
Now, you said that's a powder, so like a fine ground corn bean ration, or
Yeah, it's a powder. It's a powder. It becomes a lot cheaper. And I have a mixer, and I mix it with hay and water, and then give it as a total ration.
As a total ration. Gotcha.
Chopped hay.
Yep. Yeah, the mixer chops the hay.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Doesn't that spoil pretty quick in your weather?
Not if you keep it dry. Well,
one day. What we do as a normal thing is we only deliver once in the morning. We only feed once a day. But in the afternoon, we do what's called a topping, right? So everybody will walk. Some person will walk through the troughs and just move them around. If there's whatever is left, just move it around, to rotate it, and drop a little bit more of the feed only of the powder. We don't deliver fiber or the TRM anymore. But in the afternoon, we just turn it around so it doesn't get hot. We turn it around and just put a little bit of the feed on top.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I know we're coming up maybe even over time, but I do want to ask you on your genetic improvement a little bit. You told us you cull ewes, that don't meet the criteria you want. What about selecting which ones are your replacements? And also, I guess along that same line, if you need new stud rams, where do you go? You raising most of your own? I know we met you at the expo. I don't remember if you were up here to buy any sheep. I'm just curious.
I'm looking to buy. I didn't buy, but I will eventually need to bring in, or want to bring in. Most of our source is been Mexico. I don't do any registered. I'm all commercial, but there's some registered breeders in Costa Rica that have very good genetics, and that's where I get my Catalan studs. And then over the years, because of what I'm doing with my smaller group that has a single ram, I'm having my own rams also. But it will definitely, and that's the reason I went, and I'm gonna try to see if I can go again this year, or maybe next year, to some place where there's either go to a farm. And we talked several. I have to go back to my notes, but genetically, U.S., Canada. There's a guy that brought some from Canada, Mexico. AI is what the guys that do registered breeding are doing in both the Santa Ynez and the Katahdin breeds. As far as me, how do I pick my replacement ewes? I'm a simple guy, as you could see. I'm passionate, but I'm simple. I weight, weaning weight, and I'm gonna keep 20%. So I'll take all the females, and organize them not by weight, because they're born in different dates. It could be 60 days difference, but I do it by daily gain, and I rank them. And then I go out there and I sort them out. So I'll sort the 20% that is keeper.
Yep.
And then I'll check teeth, I'll check feet, and I'll check especially hair. because remember those 200 that I bought? There were a lot of European breeds probably in there, and some of them they just don't go away, and they'll have this big shed of wool that I don't need it here, not with
Yep.
my temperature.
Yep.
So I will put that 20%. It could be 15 or 10, and then I'll put the other ones on another group. And if there's any of those that I don't like that has any issues, with feet conformation or tooth problem or what do you call it, in the belly, the hernia.
Oh,
Okay, I had a lot of that at the beginning. I had hernia. I don't have any more because I call them out,
yeah.
and I don't, make sure they're not, when I replace, nothing has any of those defects.
Yep.
If any of those get called because I didn't like it, even you sometimes get a little picky about looks also.
Well,
I
that's
put it in the other group and I go pick up the best one from over there and I bring it here.
yeah.
And that's how I pick my 20%. So it's strictly by performance.
When you're ranking them on daily gains, are you also considering whether they were born single, twins, triplets? No, you're
No.
just by daily gains.
Yes.
No.
We don't get triplets ever because of
Oh,
the,
really?
yeah, I
With
don't,
your accelerated program.
yeah, I guess, and maybe the feed system, or I've had twice or three times, but it was at the very beginning when those breeds were very European.
Okay.
Nowadays, with the katana I'm using and the feeding program that I have, it's twins or singles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Very good.
There's one little piece I like to go back and revisit, and I still keep thinking about how your out of season breeding or breeding any time of the year works. And your day lengths, is it you're closer to the equator, it's going to be more consistent, right?
That's 12 hours. We get 12 hours of daylight every day. The variance is 30 minutes, plus minus 30 minutes. So it will be 11 and a half hours or 12 and a half hours, but it's basically 12 hours. For us, when we travel to the US or anywhere for that matter, if we go southern hemisphere also, it's so weird for it start getting dark at 3 or 4 in the winter time, or having the long nights. We won't go to sleep until 10 o'clock at night in the summer because we're like chickens. We go by the sun.
Yeah. So daylight, day length definitely influences how sheep cycle.
Mhm.
And I just wonder if that has anything to do with what seems like the ease of getting those ewes to breed up like that.
Yeah.
It could be. It could perfectly be.
Yeah,
I
so they
I,
are
I can tell you something though. I can tell you something. When I started, because I went through all the trials, and used Stexel and used Hampshire and used Dorper. Uh, those don't breed so easily.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah, they still need to be able to breed back quick. But yeah, you don't have that out of season breeding like we do. Like I was saying, our springtime breeding, which we're coming up on now,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to get used to settle because it's out of season, and that
Right. Right.
if you're
They're
that close
coming
to
in
the
from the winter with less daylight. The daylight is definitely a promoter of all the hormones, for
We're
sure.
it's going from shorter days to longer days that creates that out of season. In the fall, when we're going from longer days to shorter days is what creates our season or
Right. But they're
optimum
loaded.
breeding
They're
season.
loaded up with the sun for coming
Yeah,
in.
true, true.
So it's
So yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I don't think, I mean, I'm sure you have some seasons that are easier to breed, just weather,
yeah.
nutrition,
No. And
everything.
like
But
I said, for us, the suffering is when it rains a lot and we don't get
yeah,
sun. Sometimes it rains so much, it's not normal. Not where I am. There's other parts of the country in the northern part where they could get shady days all day and just drizzle. Here it really pours. You get good sun in the morning. You can see the evaporation, the clouds build up 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's pouring. It's pouring an inch, inch and a half. But by 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you can see the stars.
yeah, yeah.
wow.
I have a question. I probably shouldn't ask it because this could go another whole podcast. But if somebody wanted to move to Costa Rica from the U.S. and start a sheep operation, what would you tell?
Bring a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're gonna have a good time, but
Yeah.
they need to bring a lot of money.
A lot of money. Yeah, it's always interesting to see just, challenges in different parts of the world and so forth, but you always still find all the similarities of find what works for you and
Right.
try new things.
Yes, and every
Yeah.
farm is different, every operation is different, and no, thank you guys for the time. Had a really good time meeting you guys when I was there, and seeing different operations and with something that we all love.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Victor. That was very interesting.
Yeah,
Hey,
thank you.
absolutely, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah.
Have a great day.